This is the Everything Financial Radio program. I am your host, Dennis Tubbergen, and we are chatting today with Mr. Jim Babka, president of DownsizeDC.org. I'd encourage you to go check out their website and take advantage of the system they have set up to easily communicate with your elected officials. Jim, we don't have enough time to talk about everything that's going on in Washington, but give me your take as to what's going on with the entire IRS scandal.
Well, I don't think this is any surprise. The things that have been going on in this scandal are similar or akin, in some cases even more minor than the things that have gone on in previous administrations. I think you cannot possibly expect that if you're going to create an institution that can be used by political opponents to punish their enemies. I don't think, I think you're dealing in a fiction, that you don't think that this temptation is going to be there. The justification for doing it is just so easy. The rationale is just so easy to arrive at when you believe that the other side is really bad, is really immoral, that their views are very corrupt, and you have to defeat them almost at whatever cost you can do. It becomes very easy to think, we can just make their job a little bit harder. And that's the rationale that you're actually hearing people openly use on networks like MSNBC right now. They're suggesting that, there really wasn't that much done here. I mean, they just kind of made it a little bit longer or harder to get an application process. And so it's not really that big a deal now, is it? And that's really the type of slippery slope thinking that comes about when you have an entity like the IRS. So the solution here, and notice there are tons of wave rider bills here. There's all kinds of political opportunists in Congress presenting a host of proposals, some of which I would even support, that don't deal with the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that we have an IRS. Now, there are two schools of thought on this. You could be somebody who advocates the fair tax, a national consumption tax with a rebate system that makes sure that the system would not hurt the poor, that would make it so that you could choose when you paid your taxes and you wouldn't have to file. You wouldn't be under the threat of having to deal with the IRS every year. Or, better, I believe that we should replace the income tax and end it with nothing. And that means dramatic, and I mean really large budget cuts across the board to every single program in the government. First of all, Dennis, most of the programs that the state is engaged in right now are illegal because they are unconstitutional. They are not part of Congress's enumerated powers. Second, the few that are actually do more harm than good. And in fact, the truth of the matter is that the problem has never been the taxes. It's always been the spending. We have two parties in Washington. One borrows and spends, the other taxes and spends, and they switch roles when they're based on whether or not they're in power. In fact, they become so much like each other. They both borrow, they both tax, they both spend. The spending is the common denominator. Americans need to begin to see that the spending is the real problem. That spending is done to harm you. It hurts your family. It injures your neighbor. It damages your community. It destroys your industry, and it even kills people. That's what your tax dollars do, and so there shouldn't be any more of them. We should starve the beast, and we should return those monies back into the communities where it can do the most good. So I think until we get rid of the IRS, we're going to have these problems. We're going to have these problems whether it's Republican or Democrat administration.
Jim, there's been a lot of talk about now is a terrific opportunity to abolish the IRS. You see a lot of credible people actually now talking about it and getting behind the idea. But what are the chances something major actually happens at this time, in your view?
I think it's very something major can happen, but I don't think it's going to be good. My greatest concern here is that this whole situation arises out of the Citizens United decision. There have been repeated attempts by people on the progressive left to try to get around or circumvent the decision that you have a First Amendment right that's fairly absolute to associate with other people, to pull your resources together and use that ability to express yourself in the political arena. And there's been fundamental misunderstandings about how that whole process works, which obviously, as you said at the beginning of the segment, we don't have time to go down into all those details today. But because of the fact that they've done this, they try to change the rules in Montana. We have a congressman from Maryland who's tried to get the FEC to change their rules, and failing that, he went to the courts to try to get the FEC to kind of change their rules. And there's been just these repeated attempts to go after it. This arose out of a request from United States senators, Schumer, Franken, Durbin, top Democratic senators who said, you really need to focus in on all these new conservative groups that are getting started. We've got the letters. We know that they did this, And Durbin, in particular, has been absolutely unapologetic about having requested it. And so they saw that people were beginning to organize, and they said, we can't have people organizing because this threatens our incumbency. And so the campaign finance laws, which are basically incumbent protection laws, have been broadened. And this is such a threat to the establishment that they've turned to other devices like the IRS to try to intimidate their opponents. And so what's going to happen here? Well, you see people on both sides of the aisle suggesting that, well, maybe there isn't enough disclosure here. So actually what I'm concerned about, Dennis, is the reform we're going to get, the bipartisan screwing, if you'll excuse me for being so blunt, is that they're going to say, well, we need to improve disclosure laws here. We need to make sure that we have all of this stuff out on the surface. We need to undo Citizens United best we can. Why? Because the thing that the Republicans and Democrats in Washington, D.C. have in common is they're all incumbents, and they're all interested in protecting their own jobs.
So, Jim, in your view, you kind of alluded to it, but obviously we've got to fund certain basic things in the government, and obviously we have more debt than we can ever pay, and that's a topic for another program. We've explored that here. But if Jim Babka were setting tax policy, what would the U.S. tax code look like?
First of all, I don't think there would be a U.S. tax code. I mean, literally, this whole idea that you should be taxed to pay for what the services that the government provides is just a really, really bad idea. And we survived until 1913 without doing it, and we managed most of that time to have a fairly modest debt. In fact, we actually, in a couple of different years, actually got completely out of debt. I'm not saying deficit. I'm saying debt. There was actually points where we had actually paid off our debt. And so that it is possible that such a thing could happen if you stay within the constitutional bounds. The constitutional bounds, in my opinion, are already too broad. They allow for too many things, but they are there, and they are far, far less than what we are doing today. And when you understand that the money is being used to do things to hurt, then you start to understand that we need to cut. So let me just pick one area. I'm going to pick one of the very biggest areas to kind of illustrate my point, and I can do this on all of the big areas and many of the small ones as well. But I'm going to pick defense. We don't have a Defense Department. We have a Department of Enemy Creation. What they do is the Pentagon is the world's largest purchasing department, and their job is to acquire and build weapons systems and provide other defense contracts. There are lots of people who spend a great deal of money lobbying to make sure that their projects get approved because the contracts are worth far, far more. Lobbying is an investment. And the projects that come out of here are political boondoggles. They are things that don't work or don't work as well as they should, and they're put in place because they are making the military-industrial complex wealthier. And then there's the problem that once you've built all that equipment, you can't just have it sit there. It's got to be used so that more orders can come in. You got to fire those missiles. You got to use those drones. You've got to expend those bullets so that more orders can be placed in the military-industrial complex to continue to exist. We can't even bring ourselves to close many unnecessary bases, including the large, large foreign commitment that we've made to defend other nations, not just ours. We are the world's policemen. There are so many things, so many different ways that we can cut. But if you just simply say we're going to slightly, very marginally, reduce the rate of growth, not cut, reduce the rate of growth of this Defense Department, of the Department of Enemy Creation, if you're going to do that, then you have senators who will literally shriek to their gills, and then they will see to it that cut gets blocked and that spending actually continues to increase at an even higher rate than what it was before, because they represent those contractors and those interests who are supporting them. And I'm thinking of very specific senators when I say this, but it's a huge problem. It's one we cannot keep ignoring, but we have all of this time. And we've done this not just in defense, but in department after department, with the result that nobody can find anything anywhere to cut. And that's just ridiculous. And so I think, you've got to focus not on the taxes. You've got to focus on the spending, and that solves everything else.
So, Jim, we've had Professor Lawrence Kotlikoff on the program, who wrote a terrific book called The Clash of Generations. In it, he talks about the fact that we have Social Security programs, Medicare programs. We've got all these promises we've made to people that are now retired or about to retire that we can't possibly afford. How do you, in a perfect world, address this and maybe unwind all this?
Well, there is, first of all, we have to recognize, let's take Social Security as an example, or Medicare, where there is no perfect world. There are people who have come to rely on these programs because they were promised them, and they arrange their lives accordingly and place their priorities throughout their work life in another place. You can't turn to somebody who's 75 years old and say, sorry, you're going to have to go back out of the work system, Pops, because we can't provide you Social Security anymore. And it's really, really unfortunate because the program itself represents intergenerational theft. There is no trust fund. That was one of the biggest lies that's ever been told to the American public, and the fact that the public believed it is a huge part of the problem. What we have now is a system where every worker is paying in. It takes a few workers right now to provide for a retiree, and that slope has been sliding so that it's fewer and fewer as we go, and it's making the system long-term very unstable. It cannot continue to exist. So there will be defaults, and those defaults won't be minor at first. Maybe they'll raise the retirement age, or they'll means test it, or they'll decrease the growth rate of your cost of living adjustments to such a point that I, as a 45-year-old man, have very little expectation that I'm actually going to receive it. I believe it's ultimately going to come down to my generation or the next, and I'm willing to take the hit, that we are going to have to not get our benefits, and we are going to have to pay for our parents to be able to stay in benefits. So we are going to have to, we're the generation that's going to have to eat it. If we don't, then the next generation will eat it, and we won't be getting very much in benefits. The payoff will be tremendously small for the things that my kids are going to have to pay at extraordinary rates to provide me. So this needs to stop. It's broken down our social order. It's taken away the compassion that goes on between generations and families and in communities, and replaced it with this large, bureaucratic, very expensive mess that doesn't operate, as you know, and you're constantly advising people, in any kind of market sense. If you take, Dennis, the stock market, and you look at any 20-year period, the stock market's grown. If you go back to the 1920s, even pre-Depression, you find out if you put your dollar in the stock market back in 1926, today it's worth over $18,000. The market works, Social Security doesn't, and so we've got to begin to find an exit plan for my children and some people's grandchildren right now to be able to get out of this system, to not have to be a part of this system. And that is really, I think, it's gradual, it's going to be expensive, but the only moral way to address the problem.
Well, Jim, we certainly appreciate you being with us. We do have about a minute left in this segment. If someone wanted to learn more about your organization, what should they do?
They should come to downsizedc.org, and we'll soon be opening up a new project, the Zero Aggression Project. I'm hoping to be able to talk to you about that next time I'm on. We're just days away from that right now, but downsizedc.org is the current live website, and we'll be continuing to do the good work we've discussed there. They could choose to send a message to Congress. We've got a host of issues. There's something that everybody within the sound of your voice is going to agree with on that page, and probably most of your audience is going to agree with nearly everything they see there. They can pick one of those campaigns, and they can send a personalized message to the representative and two senators. At that point, they're registered in our system. It's as simple as sending an email from that point forward, and they become subscribed to the Consent Chronicle. Or if they just want to slip their toe in the water, they can subscribe to the Consent Chronicle directly, start reading some of our emails, see if it's something you like. Either way, if you don't like it, there's a link at the bottom of every one of those messages that allows you to quickly and easily unsubscribe. But I would encourage them to come and at least get on that list, the Consent Chronicle, find out more what we're doing here with Downside DC and the forthcoming Zero Aggression Project, and we'll keep you informed of what Congress is up to and give you a tool to be more effective for you and your friends. That's downsizedc.org.
All right. Well, Everything Financial Radio will return after these words.